Hello, my name is Michaela Corinne, and welcome back to another episode of the Divine Daughter Project podcast. And today we are going to be talking about Deborah in the scriptures. Her story can be found in Judges chapter 4 and 5. We're not going to go over every verse, we're just going to focus in on some specific details about her. Deborah is definitely one of my favorite women in the scriptures. She's also one of the more well-known ones. We're going to hold off on some of the most well-known women, like Mary, Mother of Christ, Mary Magdalene, Eve, Sarah. We're going to hold off on some of those ones for a while because their stories are just so big and contain so much that we're going to focus on some of the shorter, smaller stories for a little while here. So today we're talking about Deborah. We're going to start in chapter 4, Judges chapter 4, verses 4 and 5, where it says, "And Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapdoth, she judged Israel at that time, and she dwelt under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel and Mount Ephraim. And the children of Israel came up to her for judgment." So we're going to go into the Hebrew for just a minute. To be clear, I am not a Hebrew scholar, so please give grace for what I get wrong here. I am using the source Blue Letter Bible for the translations, and again, I apologize for anything I may get wrong. I do this to the best of my ability, using Blue Letter Bible with just some little things I find interesting, and also using some insights from some other scholars. So starting with Deborah's name, with all the women we will be going over what their name means in Hebrew, just because I think names contain a lot of meaning and can be important. So Deborah's name is Deborah, which means the bee. And which is interesting just because bees are fascinating. There's a lot of things with bees throughout scripture. They are often seen as a symbol of industry or hardworking, like, oh, you're such a busy bee, or you're a worker bee, or things like that. That's not my preferred symbolism of bees, and I don't think that's what I think it's one interpretation anciently, but I think that there's a better ancient interpretation, in my opinion. This is the reference to the bees of paradise, or the bees of the Garden of Eden, which we'll be talking more about when we get to Asenath, who is the wife of Joseph of Egypt. But bees are a symbol of creation. They are the ones who come and pollinate and make it so that fruits and vegetables can actually grow. So they're a pollinator, and they're a creator. So we have this very important symbol seen with Deborah kind of right off the bat, just with her name, and this kind of idea of creation there. But then we go into the root of her name, and the root of her name is Debar, which means to speak. This is used often. It will have different vowel pointings, where you'll see Debar, you'll see Debir, you'll see Debar, Debor, all sorts of different things. And they usually mean something along these lines of to speak, to tell, to oracle, things like that. So, for example, the Holy of Holies throughout the Deuteronomistic text, so like Kings and Chronicles, I believe, they refer to the Holy of Holies as the oracle, which in the Hebrew is Debir, and it's the same three-letter root, just vowel pointed differently, which vowel pointings don't exist until after the time of Christ. It's like 200 or 300 years after is when the vowel pointings get put into the text. So you also just, with her name, you have this root of this connection to the Holy of Holies and to the sacred space, which then gets built. The first title that she is given is prophetess, and Deborah, a prophetess, which we don't talk about very often. We typically talk about prophets, and often when a prophetess is mentioned, she's just the wife of a prophet. I push back against that. I think a prophetess is more than just the wife of a prophet. I think this is a woman who does prophesy. And the scriptures tell us that men and women will dream dreams, have visions, and prophesy. And it can also mean poetess as well. You'll often find prophetesses singing songs. So, for example, Miriam, the sister of Moses, is described as a prophetess, and then practically immediately goes into singing a song as they leave Israel. The Hebrew word is Naviya, which is the feminine form of Navi, which literally translates to a prophet or an inspired man. So, a Naviya would be an inspired woman. So, I think this does go beyond just the typical, it's just the wife of a prophet. And you see this used again with Eliza Snow in the early Restoration, where there is someone not of the Mormon faith who comes and declares her to be a Hebrew prophetess. She had come to write an article against the Mormons, had met Eliza Snow, and declared her to be the Hebrew prophetess. So, we see this, and I think there's some different connotations, because I think we often think of a prophet as the one sole leader who leads a group of people, specifically a church, who receives revelations. And there can be truth in that, but I think that is a limited understanding of what a prophet is. I think a prophet is just one who prophesies. So, you can have someone who is not a prophet you should follow, but is speaking prophecy, or is speaking by inspiration and revelation. But maybe to distinguish between, like, this leader prophet, we'll use, like, a capital P prophet versus a little p prophet. But, anyway, so then her next title is the wife of Lapidoth. Now, there's been some questions about this name proposed over the last few decades or so, because Lapidoth only exists one time in all of Scripture, and it's here. She's the wife of Lapidoth. In the Hebrew, what it says is Ishat Lapidot, and Lapidot here is said to be a name, but it literally translates to, it's a feminine plural of the masculine word lapid, which means lamp, flame, or torch, which probably comes from the unused root meaning to shine. And so there's a lot of people who have put forth of saying, this isn't saying that Lapidot is his name, because that'd be really weird to be naming a man torches or lamps. Like, we do give people names that aren't normally names, so like Hope and Faith, but we typically don't call people torches. And if you are going to name a man a feminine, if you are going to name a man a plural form of a noun, then you're probably going to use the masculine ending for that masculine word, so it would probably be lapidim, would be the masculine plural, but instead we have this feminine plural given, which kind of implies that we're probably not talking about a name here. And so some scholars, and I believe Margaret Barker is one of the ones that puts this forth, says instead of the wife of Lapidot, that she should be called the Lady of Torches or the Lady of Lamps, and that this is a reference to the menorah, so more temple imagery. I think that's a fine translation. I don't have anything against it. I think it's actually cool, this interpretation of tying her to the menorah. I personally have a different take on it a little bit, of that she is the wife of a shining one, because Isha is the word for woman, and the only times that I could find Ishat, which is the form of that word that's used there, is in reference to a wife. I'm not saying Margaret Barker is wrong. Obviously, Margaret Barker knows more about Hebrew than I do. And so, but I just saw it and I felt like, it seems like it probably is wife. It could be lady, it could be woman, But I'm going to go with this wife translation, and because Lapid can also mean the shining ones, it seems to me that it could be translated in one interpretation as Deborah is the wife of a shining one, which would put her as one who has earned celestial glory, which would be she's gone through all the ordinances and covenants and everything, which I think is just another way of lending it back to a temple interpretation of she is an inspired woman who has, in the language I would use, probably have made her calling an election, sure. So that's the way that I take that. Again, if you want to view it as wife of Lapidotes, that's totally fine. If you prefer Margaret Barker's interpretation of Lady of Torches and it being a reference to the menorah, I think that's totally fine too. I like that interpretation as well. But, okay. So you have this inspired woman who, in all three of her names now, she is connected in some way to the temple, which is fascinating in and of itself. And then it says that she judged Israel at that time. And at the end of verse 5, it also says the children of Israel came up to her for judgment. The word for judgment there is mishpat, which can be translated as a verdict or judgment or justice. It seems to be very legal language when you look at the Blue Letter Bible interpretation for it. And so she's more than just this military leader that we'll get to, but also this legal leader in a way. So it could be we're referring to a queen of sorts is what she is, where they don't want to call queen. Like in the Book of Mormon, we see this of they say no to kings and queens and they have judges. And we see that in the Bible as well. This kind of going back and forth between kings and queens versus judges and which one are we going to do? And so it seems like she's probably in this queen state of she's a judge in Israel, she's a prophetess, and she's a wife of a shining one. And so we're going very much to that queenly language, that inspired language, that very temple language, all the way around. We're very temple language here. And then it says at the beginning of Judges 45 that she dwelt under a palm tree. And so there's a few things here. So dwelt is yishav, which means to sit down, to dwell, to marry, to abide. To marry as in give a dwelling to kind of thing. So you have this, like, this is where she remains. It's used a lot throughout the scriptures of, like, and so dwelt in this land. They're in this land, they're amongst this people, and they're kind of involved in the culture there, kind of thing. Or this is kind of where they're making their home for a time. So she's made her home in one way or another, at least for a time, under this palm tree. And palm trees are fascinating because we again have temple iconography here, because palm trees are found a lot throughout the temple. You see the palm leaves being waved at Christ coming in, declaring him to be king. The pillars of the temple are palm trees, Joachim and Boaz. Those temples, they're stylized palm trees. And you just see this a lot throughout. And there's a lot of things that are very fascinating about palm trees and them being used as a symbol. But that's for another time when I put stuff together on that one day, because I have lots of sources there. But again, just in these two verses, she's just soaked in this temple language. You have the inspired woman who's the wife of the shining one, whose name is the bee, which come like bees of paradise, which is the Garden of Eden, or even the speaking place, who comes and dwells under a temple a temple symbol, and she is acting in this queenly way. So I feel like it's safe to say that Deborah was likely a woman who was initiated into the mysteries and was very temple involved, which I find interesting. Okay, so then as far as the story goes, they are in war. They're at war, and Barak, kind of this like right-hand man, it kind of seemed like, comes up to her and is like, yep, we found Sisera, who is the captain of the enemy army, and we want to go after him. And she's like, awesome, go after him, but just so you know, it's not going to be to your honor, that you are going to chase him, and it will deliver him into the hand of a woman. And Barak's like, awesome, great, whatever, will you come with us, because we know that you are faithful and you have God on your side, and so we want that going into this. And she's like, yeah, sure, of course, but again, women will deal with him. You are not going to be the one to kill him. So they're chasing him down, and Sisera comes across a woman named Yael. It's often pronounced Jael. I just don't like the sound of it, so I'm going with the Hebrew pronunciation, because J's in the Hebrew are actually Y's. So Yael. So Sisera comes to Yael and is like, hey, I need help and shelter, and I'm running, and please help me. And she's like, awesome, great. And so she brings him into the tent. She gives him milk to drink, and then like stands guard, and then he falls asleep, and then she takes one of the stakes of her tent and puts it through his head, and he dies. And then when Barak and Deborah come along, Yael presents him and is like, look, I killed him. He's dead now. So, and then the chapter ends on, and God subdued on that day Jabin the king of Canaan before the children of Israel. And the hand of the children of Israel prospered and prevailed against Jabin the king of Canaan until they destroyed Jabin the king of Canaan. So, they're victorious. And this story is kind of an interesting one just because we see exhibited here the strength and power of women, and that this is being put into their hands, and that women aren't just like the kind of sitting on the sidelines kind of people, but they are actively involved in God's plans. So, in their own ways. Okay, and then we go into chapter 5, which is a song that Deborah and Barak sing, praising God about their victory of the day. This is kind of similar to the song that Miriam sings after they're able to escape Egypt. Thank you that this happened. You delivered us from our enemies. You brought them down. Near the end of chapter 5, it's blessed above women shall Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, be. Blessed shall she be above women in the tent. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. She brought forth butter in a lordly dish. She put her hand to the nail, and her right hand to the workman's hammer. And with the hammer she smote Sisera. She smote off his head when she had pierced and stricken through his temples. At her feet he bowed, he fell, he lay down. At her feet he bowed, he fell. Where he bowed, there he fell down dead. So, kind of going over what exactly had happened in this and praising God for this and everything. This is a song, again, that is sung. So, kind of going back to this poetess interpretation of the Naviya. And then at the beginning, chapter 5, verse 7, it says, the inhabitants of the villages ceased. They ceased in Israel until that I, Deborah, arose, that I arose a mother in Israel. Now this phrase here, this title that she's given, is interesting. As far as we are aware, Deborah never had any children. She might have, but they're never mentioned in the records as far as I'm aware. But she's still called this mother in Israel. Im B'Yisrael. It does say that mother can be used figuratively, but we kind of see an example here of she's being this nurturing, guiding, protective force in the life of the children of Israel, and so she's given this name Mother in Israel for this purpose of she's acting like this mother to the children of Israel. But yeah, there's obviously a lot more verses. This was kind of a quick run through. There's some focuses on some specific verses, but that's the story of Deborah. And again, it's great. This is Judges chapter 4 and chapter 5. we'll be back in the Women of Mormondom next week, and then after that we'll be visiting another woman in scriptures. So, anyway, I hope that this was uplifting and that you learned some things from it. And I hope that you have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week. And I will see you all next week. Bye.